Hey guys, we finally made it to the last video. Chapter 4.4, Why did Japan become a military dictatorship in the 1930s and with what consequences? So, Japan's international status in 1919 and its reactions to the Paris Peace settlements. So, we're going back to after World War I, when Japan was strong, had a growing economy, modern army, and the most power in Asia. At the Paris Peace Conference in 1919, Japan sat with the world's major powers and was given land in China and a permanent seat in the League of Nations. But Japan proposed racial equality and was rejected by the Western powers, especially Britain and the USA, and this made Japanese people feel upset because they weren't treated as equals since they were Asian and against the white people, and yeah. Japan was then denied control over the Shantung province in China. Even though Japan had already been given some rights there, the land was handed back to China, and a lot of Japanese people saw this as unfair and disrespectful. These decisions made Japan feel humiliated, and trust in the Western nations started to fade. Then we have political and economic factors in the failure of democracy. Japan had tried democracy in the early 1900s with a system called the Diet, where citizens could vote. But the emperor had most of the power, and the 20s and the 30s went on. Japan faced more problems like political arguments, corruption, poverty, and unemployment. They also had secret military groups, and they wanted to return to military leadership. There was also a lot of economic struggles, which made it worse. Japan was really hit hard by the Great Depression. Its exports dropped, a lot of factories closed, and many people became poor. The government's attempts to help weren't enough, and by 1931, people had lost faith in democracy and thought they needed something stronger. So ultra-nationalist ideas spread, and some even assassinated political leaders who supported democracy. And the army grew more powerful and started making its own decisions without the government's approval. Impact of military rule for Japanese expansionism. So as the army took control, Japan started expanding its territory by force. In 1931, they invaded Manchuria and a part of China that was rich in resources like coal and iron. The army said this was to protect Japanese business interests, but they acted without the government approval, and they called Manchuria, they changed it to Manchukuo. The League of Nations told Japan to leave Manchuria, but Japan ignored them and actually left the League of Nations in 1933, and they signed an agreement with Nazi Germany and later on fascist Italy, and this marked the start of Japan's aggressive expansionism in Asia. Japan and China went to war. Japan had better weapons and quickly captured big cities like Shanghai and Nanking. They couldn't take they couldn't take over all of China though, so because the resistance was strong and the war just kept getting longer and more brutal, and a lot of Japanese soldiers committed bad things, and tensions grew with Western countries like USA and Britain. So some reasons for Japanese involvement in the Second World War was because Japan wanted more land and resources. As we know, they were getting more aggressive, they wanted more things, when World War II had started in Europe, Japan saw this as a chance to take more of Asia, since the European powers and the League of Nations was more focused on Europe itself and USA. They saw this as a chance to take over Asia, and they invaded Indochina, and the USA responded by putting economic sanctions and cutting off oil supplies to them. Japan did not like this, and they saw it as a threat and made a tough choice, which was negotiating through peace or going to war. In 1944, they decided to join the Second World War, and in December 7th, Japanese planes bombed the U.S. naval planes at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. The goal was to destroy the U.S. Pacific Fleet before it could stop Japan's plans, and the attack damaged ships and attacked over 2,000 people. The US declared war the next day, and a lot of historians say that Japan struck first because they thought war with the US was unavoidable. They wanted to weaken the US before war began, and they just wanted to attack because they were going to make the US give up and negotiate peace. However, a lot of US ships were not at the harbor at the time of the bombing and survived. So the damage was serious, but like it didn't really like affect them in total that much. And the attack like united Americans and pulled US into World War II. And Japan was hoping for a quick victory, but in the end they just made USA like an enemy. To end it off, Japan became a military dictatorship in the 1930s and was humiliated, failed democracy, and still struggled economically. The military believed expansion through war was the only solution, but invading Manchuria, attacking China, and bombing the USA's naval led to a lot of consequences. And instead of becoming more powerful, Japan just found itself like fighting a world war for like what? Because they didn't really like do anything. Well, that's it for my content creator moment. Last video. Bye.